So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are delighted to have Nadine Mazzola joining us for this presentation on forest therapy and forest bathing. First, I just want to tell you a little bit about Hilltown Land Trust. We're a small nonprofit land conservation organization serving 13 rural towns in the Hilltowns region of Western Massachusetts. Since our founding in 1986 as an all-volunteer land trust, we've conserved 5,000 acres on over 45 properties, which include properties that have public trails and access. And you can find more information about our public properties on our website, hilltownlandtrust.org. Since 1986, we've grown to be a very small staffed organization. We have 2 staff members and we have 2 AmeriCorps members serving with us each year. And of course, in addition to conserving and taking care of conserved land, public events like this one are a big part of our work, helping to connect people to the natural world. And a big reason that we're able to do that is the AmeriCorps program called TerraCorps. Allie is our TerraCorps Community Engagement Coordinator this year, and she has organized a series of events throughout her service year. And this is the last one that she has organized. Her service year ends on Friday. So Allie, thank you for all of your help this year and all of your service at Hilltown Land Trust. And I hope you all will join me in thanking Allie for everything she's done this year. So events like this, which we offer free or low cost, so that income is not a barrier for people to participate in our programs. If you're able to at this time, and if you enjoy this webinar, please make a donation to support this work. We really rely on donations to do this work, and your support is crucial to that. I'll put a link to the donation form on our website in the chat box in a moment, and at the end of the webinar as well. If you are able to donate, we really appreciate your support. And those of you who do donate, thank you. Now I am very excited to introduce Nadine Mazzola. Nadine is a guide, trainer, mentor, with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, and is the founder of New England Nature and Forest Therapy Consulting, based in Acton, Mass. She also wrote the book Forest Bathing with Your Dog, which won a bronze medal in the Best First Book Nonfiction category from the 2020 Independent Publisher Book Awards. The book combines the practice of forest therapy with our practice of walking our dogs and evaluates the depth of both. Nadine has been guiding forest therapy walks since 2015. She has been featured on PBS Windows to the Wild, ABC's Chronicle, and in the Boston Globe and Boston Magazine. Nadine has a business and marketing background and was formerly a world professional pocket billiards player competing on the Women's Professional Billiard Tour. Also an artist, she facilitates expressive arts classes, often incorporating elements of forest therapy throughout. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nadine. Thank you for being here, Nadine.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Allie. Thank you, Allie, for all your work for Hilltown, and it's a real pleasure to be joining you. Thank you to Hilltown Land Trust as well. I'm excited to be here today talking about my passion, the thing I love to do most, which is forest bathing, or also called forest therapy, and guiding forest therapy walks for folks. So I'm going to share a bit of a PowerPoint today. I really welcome questions throughout. It might be easiest to just type questions in the chat as we go, and then we can ask you to read it out. But I'm also really at ease with if you just want to take yourself off mute and share a question, and especially if there are folks on the phone, that you're obviously welcome to take yourself off mute and share. I think I'll try and pause during the presentation to see if there are any questions, and that would be a good time as well as at the end. So without further ado, let's share the screen, and I'm gonna move the chat over. Whoops. Okay, so now I'm realizing I just need to open the chat window again. Okay, so this is me. This is my book, Forest Bathing with Your Dog. If you have a dog, I highly recommend it. Just trying to, there we go. So what is forest bathing? And I think I'm going to start by explaining first what it's not. So I think almost all of us are probably familiar with naturalist walks or learning where we go out and maybe we're guided and we learn about doing learning about plants or animals, really important and wonderful things to do, but not what forest bathing is. Another thing we're really familiar with perhaps is hiking or walking or running out in the woods for exercise. Also really important and wonderful things to do, but not what forest bathing is. Forest bathing is really about sensory connection, coming back into our bodies and slowing down, reconnecting, if you will, with our own relationship with the land. And in that, it can be any way that feels comfortable to people. There's no one right way of being in relationship with the land. I dare say many of us have relationship with our yards and our gardens and favorite trails that we walk every time, and perhaps tend them and care for them in different ways. So there's many, many different ways of being in relationship with the land. So I'll come back and talk a little bit more about the sensory connection and the slowing down, but first I just want to jump and give you a little bit of history of forest bathing and some of the origins of it. So the term forest bathing actually is a translated term from Japan. And the term in Japanese is Shindin Yoku. I'm actually going to type that in the chat. And it's spelled, if you just say it out, it's spelled Shinrin Yoku, but it's pronounced with a D, the R, so it's like Shindin Yoku. And that term literally translates into taking forest bathing or bathing in the atmosphere of the forest. And I have here saying it's a new and a very old practice. So it's new in the way of, in Japan in the 1980s, Japan was experiencing a huge tech boom. And their Ministry of Health also noticed that they had a huge spike in stress-related illnesses and autoimmune disease. And so they started studying what was going on and what different possible remedies. And one of the things they were studying was what happens when we take people out in nature and people spend time out in nature. And in Japan and South Korea, they did this in a very innovative way, which is rather than bringing elements of nature into the lab and isolating them and studying them individually, they actually brought a portable lab out to different places on the land and said, what happens when people spend a weekend, 3 days and 2 nights, or 30 minutes a day in this spot under these trees? And some of the results they found where, as you might expect, that blood pressure came down, the stress hormones, cortisol, were lower. Something that got higher was variable heart rate, which is the rate at which our heart is able to get higher, but then also calm down. So it's that sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and how fast we recover and go back into our relaxation response. And they found that that was much higher, which is a good thing, of being able to switch back and forth. Another thing that was somewhat unexpected was that it boosted people's immune system. And it boosted the immune system in the way of a type of white blood cell called a natural killer cell. And this is a generalist blood cell in our immune system that kind of goes around and fights little abnormal things and kind of helps to prevent, it's not 100%, but it helps to prevent, raises our ability to minimize those things. So they found that after spending 3 days, 2 nights under the forest canopy in a conifer forest of Hinoki cypress, that the NK cells were elevated 50%, and they stayed elevated over the course of a month, tapering down finally to about 14% after 30 days. So that's a really dramatic increase for me. And that's actually one of the things that first got me interested in forest bathing, which was that just by being out under the trees, we can boost our immune system. And the mechanism by which that is done is these oils, these essential oils called phytoncides that the trees emit. And it's actually the tree's own immune system that they emit these volatile oils that help them fight off viruses and bacteria and fungus. And it turns out that these volatile oils are also good for us. And there's lots of research on it, and Allie's going to share some links after the webinar. We'll have some follow-up stuff. So if you're interested in that, we'll share a link to a great summary paper that kind of pulls it all together, as well as a book, one of my favorite books on the subject, and another website. So I also have here, it's a very old practice, and humans we evolved in nature, we evolved in the forest. So this is really the coming home. This is really coming back into relationship with the land where we belong in nature. We are nature. And I think somewhere along the line in the Industrial Revolution, or maybe even earlier in history, we started to forget this, and it just started to be written about humans are separate than nature. We're different, we're above nature, or we're just separate than nature. And so we've started to lose this connection to it. But I think when we all go back and spend time in nature, there's just something in our bones where it just feels right, and you just are restored in different ways. So we know that just, in anecdotal evidence in the way of just spending time in nature, we know that we are part of nature. And so just remembering that. And in that, it's a very old practice. Just get my slides working here. There we go. Okay, sorry, just zipping around. So I was mentioning Japan, but South Korea is also one of the countries that has done a lot of research on this. And they've also done a lot of research on the phytoncides that trees emit. So just one of the wonderful things about forest bathing and spending time in nature is it just increases our resiliency and increases our body's ability to trigger the relaxation response. Just moving some of the things around. So I can tell I have a few of my slides out of order here, so forgive me. Just talking about how to do forest bathing. And in talking about this, I'm also going to come back and talk about a little bit about what it is in the sensory part. But we'll just dive in here. So how to do forest bathing, kind of starting with the beginning, the middle of while you're in it, what are you doing? And also a question that a lot of people ask about, should you bring your dog? So beginning is really just find a spot to sit and wander, and starting with the intention of doing some forest bathing. There's no real one way, right or wrong way to do this. And you know, if you're a hiker and you like to go out and walk around and get some exercise, I always feel like it's really important to honor that and to get your exercise or take your dog for a walk and do the things that you want to do. And when a moment arrives where you maybe feel like resting, or just there's a place that appeals to you and you'd like to sit down for a while, that is kind of the calling of the land, the forest, really speaking to you perhaps and saying, let's do a little forest bathing. Let's slow down a little bit. So whether or not to bring your dog, you know, some dogs are old, some dogs are young, some dogs are really active. I think our dogs can be a real asset to forest bathing in the way that they are always in their senses. They are always sniffing around and investigating things. And that is so much of what forest bathing is about, being in your senses, that they can really help add to that. I'm realizing I haven't paused for any questions. I'm thinking I'm going to do that in a moment. So our dogs are always in their senses. So coming back to being in our senses, we have our sense of sight, our sense of smell, hearing, taste, and touch, and something I have down here called body radar. I just want to say something about the sense of taste, a little bit of an awareness that if you don't know a plant, you should not ever taste anything that you do not know yourself. But if you are in your garden and you have herbs or other plants that you know are safe, or other plants that you know to be safe out in the forest, this can be a wonderful thing to add. It also doesn't always have to be just tasting something that you're putting in your mouth. Just opening your mouth and taking a sip of air you can often taste something in the air, or perhaps a little bit of a texture, or it's often something that we don't even really have words for, but there's like a sensation that you can taste in the air. So I encourage you to explore with that. Using our sense of smell. This is another way where I feel like our dogs can give us great inspiration, but just on your own, to just wander or sit and just notice with your sense of smell. See what you notice. Do the smells change? Are they always the same? Maybe it smells different on one side of you than on the other side. And also turning your head up and to the wind, the way our dogs do or an animal does when it catches a scent on the wind, can be wonderful. And often it smells different when you just turn your nose up to the wind. Our sense of sight is the one that we depend on the most. And so it's kind of our default. So it's really nice to start bringing in some of these other senses. So just walking for a little bit focusing on your sense of smell. And then maybe after 5 minutes or so, switching to your sense of hearing and just listening. You know, when was the last time you just listened? We think about noticing the wind with our sense of sight a lot, but what does the wind sound like? What smells does the wind bring? So there's many ways with all of our senses to experience the different things that go on out in the forest. And then our sense of touch. So just feeling perhaps a breeze on your skin, or the sun, or the coolness of a rock might be different on one side of your body than the other. Just taking time to notice that, as well as exploring and touching the different tree bark, or perhaps even picking up a handful of dirt and just smelling it. You gardeners will know what I mean, like when you're just digging in the fresh earth and the scents that are coming up, and just getting your hands in the dirt can feel really wonderful. So just doing that while you're out in the forest as well. You can bring in your sense of touch and your sense of smell, and smell a handful of pine duff, and just take that in. So slowing down is also, actually, I'm going to come back to slowing down. The last sense I have here is body radar. And I don't, it's not one of our 5 senses, but I feel like it's partly our intuition and this a way of knowing that we have where we can just sense things with our whole body. And so just as you're walking out on the land and out on the trail, to just see when you say walk from the forest into a meadow, or the meadow into the darkness of the forest, or maybe you just come to a spot by a stream and there just seems to be a presence there in terms of the way the land feels. When I say a presence, I mean like that the land has a certain feeling to it and it just resonates with you. That just taking that in. So with all of our senses, just noticing when we're curious or enjoying things and letting that inside our bodies in whatever way feels right, to just feel that enjoyment or that curiosity about something and letting ourselves go over and touch it. And then slowing down is really, it can be edgy sometimes. It can be hard to slow down. We walk really fast a lot of times. Our dogs might be moving really fast if we're walking with our dogs. And so just noticing that it can be edgy to slow down, and perhaps just slowing down a little and then seeing if you enjoy that and slowing down a little bit more. There's no one right or wrong way. It's really important when forest bathing to do it in your own way, in a way that feels good to you. So it's important to experiment. That's one of the things about forest bathing, is that we all have our own ways of doing it and things that we enjoy. So it's really important to honor that. How long might you forest bathe? You might just have a few minutes here or there, but you might also have 20 minutes to sit or even longer. So I think usually about 20 or 30 minutes is a really lovely amount of time to really kind of slow down and relax and sit and notice things. But if you only have 5 minutes, or you only have a snippet of time to just check in with all of your senses and see what you can smell and maybe taste the air, and what can you hear with your eye, what can you hear with your ears, and then notice with your eyes, that's just a really lovely way to slow down and have a moment of forest bathing. So I'm just going to pause here and see if there are any questions about the how-to, or really about anything, but questions about how-to, or wondering about good places to forest bathe. And if you would like to just come off mute and share your question, you're really welcome to.
Nadine, I had one thought, which was, you mentioned being sure to know before you use your sense of taste. And I would add to that, being sure to know how to identify plants like poison ivy and sumac before using your sense of touch, because that can definitely spoil a good forest bathing day.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Katie. I think that's super important. One of the things I always tell people is to stay on trail and to be aware of both poison ivy and just any other safety concerns when you're walking, even ticks or animals that might be around. But if you know how to identify things and you know that it's safe, it is okay to go off trail if it's permitted on that type of land. So yeah, super important to know how to identify poison ivy and all those safety concerns. And with ticks, I think ticks are just always so present in our lives these days. And I'll just say that doing a tick check anytime after you're out on the land is a really good idea. And throwing your clothes in the dryer before you wash them is a great way to get rid of any ticks that might be on your clothes. So I see a question from somebody asking about how forest bathing and meditation interact. So there's many different kinds of meditation. And I think I'm going to maybe highlight some differences for how I personally have experienced some of the difference. And I think a lot of when I've been taught some meditation practices in the past, I'm really focusing on letting my thoughts go, maybe noticing my breathing, which is sensory, but just focusing kind of inward in a way and noticing what my mind is doing or perhaps my body is doing. And when I'm forest bathing, I'm really focused out and I'm noticing what's happening on the land. So the leaves moving, the smells that I'm sensing, the things that I'm touching, the sounds I'm hearing. So I think it's more about noticing the environment with our senses. I think in the benefits that they have, the way how it affects our bodies, I think they both have very similar overlapping benefits in that they really can quiet us, bring us very present, getting into your senses and into a sensory mode, which is in a way with certain types of meditation, like when you're focusing on your breathing, that's almost like focusing on a sensory thing, and it just brings you immediately to the present moment. So, and that's the way it is with forest bathing. When you're focusing on your senses, it really brings you instantly to the present moment. So I don't know, I think it can be lovely to also meditate out in nature and maybe do a little combination and combine them. I do feel, for me personally, they are a slightly different practice because with meditation, again, this is the way I've been taught, that if I were noticing like the bird song and I was enjoying that and it was making my heart sing, that with forest bathing or forest therapy, I like let that in and just feel the pleasure of that bird song and the sun on my skin. And forest therapy is really about letting that in. Whereas with meditation, again, the way I've learned it, that it's about noticing that, but not necessarily about letting in any pleasure or kind of getting stuck on that or going into that or following with that enjoyment or curiosity. So I hope that speaks to it. If there's any follow-up question, I'm happy to speak to it more. So let's see. So again, just back to what you can do during a forest therapy, a little forest bathing experience for yourself. So just finding a time and a moment to stop and start. And then spending some time being in your senses and slowing down, noticing the smells, noticing the motion perhaps, touching the rocks, feeling your sense of touch, only touching things that you know you can identify to be safe, and just really being in your senses. And then when you're coming to the end of your time forest bathing, it's also really nice to mark it in some way. And I'm just going to pause and divert to my next slide and come back to ending. So one thing that's also different about forest therapy than meditation, perhaps, is that being out in the woods and forest therapy can also be as much about play as it is about connecting with nature. And so a wonderful thing to do is to also make something. And it can be as simple as putting a leaf next to a rock, or it can be as elaborate as you'd like. The forest is a wonderful place to let your creativity flow and to even play. You know, I recall a time of coming upon a rock where a squirrel or chipmunk or some little being had taken a pine cone and stripped all the little leafy bits of the pine cone, and there was just this pile of what looked like petals on this rock. And I went and I made some designs with them and just had a wonderful time playing. And I felt like this squirrel had actually left me some art supplies out in the forest, and to just have fun making stuff. And so that's really one of my favorite things, is to wander using found objects and leaves and sticks, and, you know, make fairy houses or forts or designs. And it just can be really wonderful. And it doesn't need to be complicated. It can be really simple as well. So just looking at the chat. So somebody was just asking for a clarification, but forest bathing and forest therapy, are they the same thing? And I think in this presentation, I am using them as the same thing. And in my book, to kind of make a distinction, I think what I say is that I look at forest bathing as kind of the term that's used as one big umbrella term for this kind of practice, this kind of work, being on the land in a sensory way. And I think that there are different, it's getting so popular these days, and people are being trained in it, that there are now different schools of forest therapy or forest bathing. The Japanese practice is different than what I was trained in here in the United States. And so there are different subtleties in them that also have to do with the culture of each of the different countries. So I hope that helps clarify. I think for forest therapy, it's really about our well-being and our health and our healing, and interacting with the forest and spending time in the forest in a way that's restorative for us, and in some kind of way. And that's a distinction I would make. So when you come to the end of some time doing forest bathing, even if it's just been 10 minutes, it can be really lovely to just take a moment to acknowledge that you're going to end. And not so much that it's about the ending, but it's really a moment to mark and incorporate what you've just been spending your time doing, and whatever you've received, you know, whether it just be the enjoyment of the birdsong and the sunlight dancing on the leaves, or just, you know, you've had a wonderful playful time and built some things, or maybe it was very memorable for some other reason. But taking a moment to pause and finish in some way can be really help with bringing that relaxation, that pleasure home with you. So oftentimes I'll just take a leaf that I find and maybe place it next to a rock or a pine cone, or just sometimes even it's just noticing, like, okay, I'm stopping and just realizing I'm going to shift gears and go on my way to something else. So I really encourage you that if you're taking a moment for forest bathing, that you do find some way to conclude it. So somebody was asking about how do you cope with insects? Really good question. I think being prepared. Anytime we spend time outside on the land, we always want to, have a hat and water. I often bring insect repellent with me. I have a organic variety that I use that works pretty well. I also have a head net that I haven't had to use in a long time, but I do have one that I bring sometimes. And then I often have like a long sleeve shirt or a gauze shirt that can protect me from the insects. And sometimes, they get you. And maybe it's also choosing a spot of where you forest bathe. So while the forest is absolutely my favorite place to do forest bathing, any place where nature and people meet is a place for forest bathing. And I often, like meadows are just one of my personal favorite places, or where the forest meets a meadow. I have a real special affection for those places. But that said, in my own garden is a lovely place to do forest bathing, and as well as often just some parks. So I would invite the thinking about, if it is really buggy, to just find a place that maybe is more out in the sun or there's a breeze, and to reduce that, because can be really overwhelming when it's super buggy. So somebody's also asking, how can you practice forest therapy in a group? And that is, it's hard now with COVID. So I'm sure that is, will change as we come back. And I know there has been some guiding going on. I actually led a walk at Tower Hill Botanic Garden a few weeks ago, and we put some special guidelines in place so that it would be safe, like only very limited people, and we all wore masks constantly throughout the whole thing. So it's really important to put safety first, no matter what you're doing. And I just also wanted to say, when I'm out on the land and out on trails, I make it a habit to always carry a mask or a bandana with me. And oftentimes I'm able to step off the trail and just stay away from people and may not need to put my mask on. But I feel like it's really important that we all have a mask with us or some kind of covering with us, so that we can protect each other and protect ourselves. So forest therapy in a group, I also want to say that one of the options that is available since COVID, that COVID actually the pandemic has actually arisen, is the rise of virtual forest therapy. And maybe we can arrange something with Hilltown Land Trust later in the summer as well, or in the fall, because it's so hot this summer. But that it can either be like a tele-guided experience or a virtual experience on Zoom. So there's different varieties of things to do. And I think my favorite is a tele-led virtual forest therapy experience, where everybody can be, like, you could even be in your house, you could be in your yard, in your garden, or you could go to a local trail or favorite spot that as long as you had the phone reception. And basically, the guide, whoever's guiding it, leads a verbal forest therapy walk, and we're able to share in between during the walk. And so that's a way during this time that we have a group experience. So when you're out forest bathing on your own, that is contrasted by a group experience where you're often led by a guide, and the guide offers a series of what we call invitations, that in between invitations we come together and share a few words. And this really enhances the group experience. And the sharing is optional, and any way that people would like to share is really welcome. So there's no pressure. If you're somebody who's quiet and more reserved and wants to keep things to yourself, that's really welcome. And that's the same on a virtual tele-led forest therapy walk, that there we are able to bring in the sharing element. And the sharing it's really important to a group guided forest therapy experience. It deepens the connection both for all of us on the walk to each other, but also with the land, and also just getting to know our own selves better. So hearing how each of us may have experienced a certain invitation, and that some people notice something that I didn't notice, and it's just really amazing to hear all the different things people share. So I really recommend at some point doing a group guided forest therapy experience. If in this day or any time really, if you're just out walking with your family and friends, it can be a little challenging to try and do some forest bathing because you're always used to talking and catching up. But I think if you can just suggest that perhaps let's take 5 or 10 minutes and walk or sit in silence and notice, and try using what I would call an invitation to focus, like let's walk for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, just noticing motion. And then we'll share at the end of it. Or let's create something. You know, this is great with younger folks or kids, of just like, let's gather some found objects and create something. Or let's sit for 5 minutes and just notice what, see what we notice with our sense of smell. And then share about them. And it's just really simple, saying things like, what did you notice? Or what are you noticing? Just keeping it really open. So it's almost, for me personally, I find it's like getting over that little bit of shyness of inviting my family or my friends to do that when usually we'd be walking together. So that is one thing about practicing forest therapy in a group. And I don't know if it's like a social group, where often I'll do some guided walks for church groups and other organizations like Hilltown Land Trust as well. So that's a great way to practice it in a group. And there's a resource that I'll have Allie put in the follow-up letter of. There's a national directory of forest therapy guides that are trained in the same way that I am. So that would be good to put in so that people can search and find a guide near them. And there's also a link to a lot of virtual walks that I can have Allie do if you're interested in attending one of those, perhaps.
Nadine, I have a question on that
Yep.
note. I'm curious how forest therapy varies from certification to certification, and what kind of goes into becoming a forest therapist, or how long the training is.
Yeah. So one clarification I'll make is that I'm not a therapist. I'm a guide. And there are many guides who take the training who are therapists. In fact, the breadth of professionals that come to this work is quite astounding to me. And there's, doctors, I think the ANFT, Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, has trained about 30 physicians now, and probably 3 or 4 times that in the number of nurses that they've trained, and as well as therapists. So in Japan, I'll start with Japan. One of the things that is kind of embedded in their culture already is that around their relationship with nature, and that nature is sentient. And that really goes back to the ancient Shinto religion, and how that just kind of infuses many, many parts of their culture. And here in the United States, many have lost that. And when we talk about nature, sometimes it's almost referred to as, it's a thing, rather than this living entity, a different form of life from our own human life, but a form of life, all the same. And so the Japanese practice, I'll say the American practice, we really try and, as I mentioned at the beginning, like coming back into our relationship with nature, our relationship with the forests and with the land, whatever that means for each of us, in whatever way that is for each of us. And in Japan, they are kind of already starting from that point. And so their walks are almost a little more casual than some of what we do here in the United States. So a typical guided walk that we're trained to do in the United States has a series of invitations. We do an introduction to let people know what we're going to be doing on the walk. If we're in person, oftentimes it lasts for 3 hours, which may seem like a long time, but it goes by and it seems like moments. It goes by very quickly. And then we end with some kind of often a tea ceremony with plants foraged from along the trail, if that's permitted. Or some kind of activity, maybe a group creation or something to incorporate the forest bathing or forest therapy experience. And in Japan, it's really almost become like a destination activity where people will leave these dense urban centers, take the train out to one of the forest therapy centers, and do a weekend of activities or a day of activities. And so they might go on a forest bathing walk where there's some tea and snacks served in the middle of it. And the guides are also including some naturalist knowledge during the walk, explaining, also like taking some spice bush and inviting you to smell it and get to know it in a sensory way, but then also sharing about what it is. And here in the United States, I might do that at the very end of the walk, but during the walk, I would really just want to interact with the different plants in a sensory way and not so much bring us back into our heads. Within the United States and Europe, I think there are some additional different schools of forest therapy there, or forest bathing. And I think it's a new field. So it's really like where yoga was 40 years ago. And it's starting to emerge with some different types of practices. I think there are some that do bring more like spending time out in nature and doing meditation, and doing more mindful things. But that's definitely different than the forest therapy that I've been trained in. And we have this saying where the forest is the therapist and the guide opens the doors. So my job as a guide when I'm guiding a group of on a forest therapy walk is really to create this kind of space, if you will, where we can all be outside, be safe, keep people aware, like Haiti mentioned, of any awarenesses like poison ivy and dangers off the trail, and create sensory invitations where people can interact with the land. And it might just be for a really restorative, relaxing time, but also really amazing insights can happen during this time and during these walks. So it can be a very restorative and engaging time, and just joining with others to share and building our community around the land and being on the land, and the importance of our being in relationship with the land for each of us can be a really wonderful aspect to a group guided forest bathing experience. So let's see what else I have here. I talked about some best practices for COVID. So just really important to be safe. And I shared about some other options for guiding, virtually led walks and in-person walks. We'll share some of those resources. I would love to guide you all someday. So I hope that there's an opportunity for that. And as well as I think there's, guides near you. that could do that. So I'm a certified forest therapy guide, and that's what I have a personal bias towards and recommend that you find. So yeah, this is an older slide, excuse me. Well, I'll just share, this is at the end of a walk, at the end of a forest therapy walk that I guided, and there was this family, and we always end our forest therapy walks with a tea ceremony. So, or some kind of activity. So they had all gathered different found objects, and we used sometimes it's on the ground, but at this place we had a forest picnic table, and everybody put out the objects that they had collected. And I believe there were some black raspberry leaves that I had collected that we made some tea from, and we had a snack, and you can see the teacups out there, and the family really had a fun time. So having children on forest bathing or forest therapy walks is just one of my absolute favorite things. They, like our dogs, they are just so full of being themselves and being in their senses. They really are inspiring to be with out in nature, and just really enjoy it and get right into it. So I'll just pause there and see if there are any other questions.
I have a question, Nadine.
Sure.
I'm wondering, in your in your training, if you end up learning about how to identify wild edibles to make like teas out of, or if that's just like, if you don't know how to identify it, how would you kind of go about having a tea ceremony without herbs from a longer walk or something like that?
Yeah, thank you it's a really important question, and a really important part of our training. We are absolutely learn about this during the training, and we have a rule that we have to be 110% sure and have 3 really good sources before we can use any plant as a tea plant. Oftentimes for guides in training, this becomes an amazing journey all its own, and getting to know these different plants. So it can be really fun to learn the different things you can make tea from. I took a bioregional herbalism class from a woman named Jade Alessandro Mace. She's in the Amherst area, and her business is Milk and Honey Herbs. And I took a summer-long bioregional herbalism class, and every single plant I learned grew in my own yard. And instead of having all these weeds, I all of a sudden realized I have all these friends, all these, other plant beings that can really offer a lot and have a lot to give. So that was really a lovely personal experience. Yeah. So, but also really important to be safe, and really important to know that 110% rule, and those 3 sources are just super important. So any other, I'm going to go back and talk a little bit about forest bathing with your dog for a moment, unless anybody has any other. Oh, I see another question. Are you familiar with the Kapalu Forest Therapy Guide training program? I was registered for that this fall, but won't happen. Oh, I'm so sorry. And I hope that it does happen soon, or next year. I am familiar. One of the trainers of that, Mark Rule, he is trained by the same organization that I have trained with, Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides. We actually had a lot of trainings paused as well, but then the organization pivoted and is doing a combination of online things. And the Kripalu training is different in that it has forest therapy, and I believe multiple other things in it. It's not just a forest therapy guide training program, I believe, unless they have a new one. But I've heard wonderful things about it. So I think you're really in for a treat, regardless of where you go. And I hope that it is able to come back next year. So I'm just gonna maybe go, oh, hold on. Let's see. Got a lot of things on my screen right now. I'm just gonna go back to forest bathing with your dog and just talk about that for a moment. Get this blown up here. So, as I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, forest bathing with your dog, it might seem a little counterintuitive if you have a dog that's really active and you're not sure about how to incorporate that. But as I was telling Allie before we started, I started looking into forest bathing with my dog after I had taken my training to become a forest therapy guide, and I really wanted to do both things. I love being out in the woods with my dog, and I almost couldn't bear to leave her home while I went out to sit in the forest or to wander in the forest. So I'd always bring her with me, and sometimes she would be too active and other times not. But one of the things I discovered was that she actually, when I started tuning into her, she is always in her senses. Our dogs are always in their sensory mode. And so she was actually guiding me to things and giving me inspiration. I was telling Allie this story of when my dog went off the trail to look in a whole bank of ferns after a chipmunk, and I was inspired watching her wading around in all these ferns. It looked like so much fun, and the ferns were like waving and saying, "Come join us." And so after feeling a bit of hesitation, I just wandered off the trail into the ferns myself and felt like I had really received this invitation from my dog, Juliet, to go and wander and enjoy the ferns myself in my own way. And so I really got the inspiration of how can we partner and bring our dogs into the forest bathing experience. It was, a good 6 months or maybe even a year that I would experiment with sitting quietly and letting Juliet, noticing what she was doing, and sometimes feeling the tension, if you will, between how I wanted to sit quietly and how she wanted to investigate things or move along. And it was through that process of experimenting that I really realized that she would tune into my energy. And as I sat quietly or wandered quietly and slowed down, she would start to do that. So our connection, a human canine connection, actually became even more alive. It was really wonderful to see. And another thing that really stands out to me that I noticed was that when I am walking along the trail and I see a spot that I want to stop and sit at, almost instantly I can tell, oh, this is a good spot, it's safe, I feel comfortable here, there's no poison ivy, it feels good, I'm just going to sit down and relax. Well, our dogs actually need about 10 or 15 minutes even to sniff around and investigate everything. And so they're on a different time schedule, on a different rhythm. And that once I started allowing Juliet, my dog, her own time and rhythm, that she would do her thing, and then indeed she would just sit down or relax, and her energy would get in tune with mine. And it was important that I not fuss with her and kind of try and get her to do something before she was ready. But as I just really relaxed into noticing the forest and enjoying myself, and my energy came down, she could really sense that. And one of the things I discovered during writing my book is that the human-dog connection, the way dogs can sense us, is stronger than even an infant's sensing of its mom, human infant and human mom. And so that our dogs can really tune into what's going on with that. That's not a surprise to any dog owner, but just kind of knowing that scientific fact really engaged me in part of this process and bringing my dog into doing this practice as well. So I think, I don't know if anybody has any more questions. And wonder if any of you, or the person who's thinking about taking the forest therapy guide training, or if anybody's been on a group forest bathing walk with any kind of forest bathing or forest therapy experiences before, or.
You know, I haven't been on one, Nadine, but it sounds like, you know, something that is doable right now, which is, you know, that it's hard to find activities right now that you can, you know, feel comfortable doing and safe doing, especially with other people. But it really seems like this would be something that you could participate in. And as you pointed out, and as someone else pointed out, maybe with some bug nets and masks, but you know,
Yeah,
it's great to offer something like this, maybe a little later in the summer or the fall.
Yeah, I think it can be done. I think normally I would take a group of about 12, and that feels too big right now, like limiting it to like 6, where everybody can be properly physically distanced and have masks with them, and just really important to follow some of those safety protocols. But I absolutely agree with you. We don't serve tea, like I don't serve tea now during COVID. But we do something else, like we create something and minding physical distancing and everything. So there's still lots of wonderful richness. I also see in the chat, somebody said they've done several guided forest bathing walks out at Mount Greylock State Reservation. So awesome, that's terrific. Then also I see somebody else in the chat has said that they've been an environmental educator for many years, and this is a natural extension for you as a hike leader. Yeah, I think my mind immediately goes to this, a colleague of mine named Jeff Brogan. He's a wilderness guide up in Maine and leads canoeing trips and outfitting backpacking trips up in Maine. And he came and took the training to become a forest therapy guide. And it was a natural extension of what he did. And he was able to, you know, take people out in nature, but then when the moments arose to, you know, have some time for forest bathing and just relating to the land and different moments during the trip in different ways was really welcome and really enjoyable for folks. And I see somebody also says, I've done one on Grape Island of the Boston Harbor with several of my colleagues. It was really an eye-opening and bonding experience. That might be with my colleague Tam Willie from Boston, possibly. But yeah, you know, I think it's really interesting. The person wrote here in the chat about a bonding experience, and that it comes back to when we're doing this in a group, we come together in between invitations and share a few words. And again, that's optional, like silence is a really welcome form of sharing, that it really deepens everybody's nature connection. You know, without going into it too much, but there's just really, it's an important part of nature connection is being able to share it with each other And I think that's partly even the different events that Hilltown Land Trust and other organizations do of, in some way, shape or form, we're coming together and we're sharing about nature and nature connection and different ways to be involved in it. And it brings us together. So somebody's asking, is forest therapy guiding a hobby, or can one do this as a vocation? So yes and no. I think it's really, that this is pretty much what I do professionally, but it's one of several things I do. So I don't think the profession is at the level of being able to just be a forest therapy guide and just make a living on guiding forest therapy walks. That said, it really depends on your entrepreneurial spirit and what you like, where your connection, where your what do I want to say, like how you're, what you do in life, so if you were a leadership coach and you did coaching with different organizations and that was the main thing you did, and you brought in forest therapy and combined, brought this into all or most of your leadership trainings, that there was an element of forest therapy woven throughout, then yes, like this could be what you do. Just guiding walks for different organizations, I think it's still hard, although it takes time to build up kind of a book of organizations. After 5 years, I have many organizations that I work with once or twice throughout the year, some more. Tower Hill Botanic Garden I work with almost every month. So it really is developing that kind of thing. And the other thing that we're really seeing starting to emerge is just with different organizations and corporations of the wellness, they're offering different well-being and wellness programs for their staff. So we're starting to work with them. So again, it's, as a guide, it's, where do you feel comfortable going and interacting and kind of creating some of that business. It's, the profession is still early enough that we really have to go out and get creative about the different types of opportunities we might create for ourselves. And thinking of yoga maybe 40 years ago, that's really where forest bathing and forest therapy is these days. But yes, there are opportunities. Lots of people are interested in. And one of the things that's amazing of during the pandemic, I don't know about all of you, but there are definitely things that the pandemic has kind of called into being that wouldn't have occurred otherwise, that are good. And one of them is this virtual forest therapy guiding, that this practice really translates really well in a virtual format. None of us expected that it would, but people started trying it and it's been super successful. And one of the things that has been richest about it is that often when you're guiding a virtual walk or a tele-led walk, is that people are at home, they're in their own yards, and they're connecting to their own land. And that is almost, in a way, it's richer than all going out to some trail somewhere that they may not have been on before, but they're getting to know their own land in the way of forest bathing and forest therapy, which can be really rich. So it's an emerging profession.
Nadine, if I can add a few things, just because I love this topic. I'm so glad. Thank you so much, all of you that have worked to put it together so we could come and learn more. I work for Department of Conservation and Recreation, DCR, and I work at Mount Greylock State Reservation. And I started a program a long time ago called Mountain Mindfulness. And I worked at Kripalu many years ago, for about 10 years. And so I had that background, and I wanted to kind of share with the public. We have free programs, and I wanted to kind of incorporate that bringing people to nature, and I knew a little bit about how it made me feel to be walking in nature. And after doing certain programs, I connected with a man who had a program called Hike with Healers. And this is out in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts. And he had been trained in forest bathing. And so you might know him, very, very nice man. But so that's how I started learning. And then I started working with him in the wintertime and doing, helping him guide and do some sweeps on his programs. And then I started bringing them to the mountain for the programs that we had. And so now, up until COVID, we had 2 programs a week that were mountain mindfulness. And we had I have several practitioners that come and will do the forest bathing, which is wonderful. Because we're close to Kripalu, a lot of the guides, when they're first emerging from their training, I offer them time to come and practice their craft, because it's all volunteer and it's free, but they've been trained. And Michael Mortali, you may know him as well. He's the director of the outdoor programs at Kripalu. And he started the forest bathing section of outdoor
mindfulness guide, I believe it is.
Yeah, anyway, but so he's come and done programs too, and it's just wonderful. So I've been doing it now for a couple of years, and people are really responding. And so I've started maybe, once a month doing something, and now we're doing it. Then it was, we were doing it like 3 times a week, and people from the local community are thrilled because luckily for us in the state, we're able to do free programs, and it gives people an opportunity to try something without putting a lot of investment in. And the response has been very, very good. So I hope that when COVID is over, we'll be able to do more. But we have a lovely open field or a lawn where the practitioner can be at the top, and then it rolls down. And so people can spread out. So eventually, when we're able to do programs again, we'll have programs. We're hoping to do a BYOB, which is bring your own blanket, and have people spaced out. So we might be able to do different programs like yoga and meditation, and eventually back on the trail with forest bathing. So, but anyway, it's a wonderful program. If anyone hasn't done it before, find a guide and enjoy, or do it yourself, like you mentioned. So thank you again.
Yeah, it's I think doing it on our own is great, and there I think doing both, because on your own it can be just really super lovely and may just be needed these days, but taking the opportunity to do it and try some of the opportunities that you're talking about are really important. The hiking with healers, that's a colleague of mine, Eric, who was trained in the same way that I was, and of course I'm biased and feel like that's the best training out there. It's a global training that's offered all around the world. And so, yeah, I think he does some wonderful stuff, and that's wonderful that you got to work with him, and look forward to looking for that. And I also just want to say with COVID, just because we've been talking about doing some group things, like it's so important that we're safe and we follow our local state, our state protocols, and any protocols that our town have or our organization, and just to really support all our organizations and governments and doing what they're trying to do. So just that, I guess I'm saying that also just because the organizations I'm guiding with are creating regulations, and we're being really respectful of following all of those. So just to proceed in that.
Michelle, it looks like there's a question in the chat box for you. Is there a web address for the Greylock information?
We have a website. DCR has a website, and you can look up mass.gov, mass.gov, and all the different parks across the state are listed. And we have actually several other parks have started to do like a mountain mindfulness and are interested in the forest bathing. So I see some of my colleagues are on as well today, Barbara Bowles and Kristen Carnahan, and I think it maybe Amy Wilmot might be on as well. And we've had conversations across the state and are quite interested in forest bathing. And so we've had other programs also on the east side. And we used to have a program where everything was listed on a calendar, but right now you can just go, well, we don't have the programs running now because of COVID. So we don't have anything up online that you could find because we're not doing them. But certainly you could go online to the DCR website, and we have programs all across. When we're up and running, we have programs all across the state. So that would be the first place to go. Otherwise, we do have an unofficial Facebook page, but eventually we'll have we will have a bigger Facebook or Twitter or other places that you can go. But right now we don't have the program, so you wouldn't be able to find anything at this point in time. But feel free to search for the future.
Thanks, Meshel. Yeah, I just posted a link in the comments to, it looks like GCR's calendar of events, which, as you said, doesn't really have anything on it right now because of COVID, but in the future, I know for the most part, we used to do all of our programs in person. And since COVID, we've been doing webinars more and events like this, which has been great, and that it has allowed us to reach a different audience, especially people that maybe couldn't make the trip out to the hill towns for in-person events. But so if you live in another part of the state, sounds like DCR might have some programs for this near where you live when that is possible again.
Definitely. So look us up.
Yeah, I've done a couple things with DCR, and I know here in the east part of Massachusetts, I know some other guides that have, so it's really a wonderful. They've been really supportive, and it sounds like, you know, staff is starting to get trained too, so that's really wonderful. I'll also want to just say, like, I love the western part of the state, and Mount Greylock in particular is just really near and dear to my heart. There's a trail on, I don't know what side of the mountain it is, but the Roaring Brook Trail, and that stream is just one of my like real heart places in western Massachusetts. So yeah.
West side.
What did you say? I didn't quite hear it.
Oh, I said that's on the west side, Roaring Brook. So we have over 13,000 acres. We have over 80 miles of trails at Mount Greylock. So there's plenty to choose from, and they're all open. So even during COVID, we've remained open. The buildings, the visitor center is not open, but we do have the Bascom Lodge is open at the top. And so people can come and people can hike. We do ask that you have your masks with you because some of the trails aren't wide enough to get 6 feet away. But we've had actually all of the different parks that we have been getting wonderful responses during this time of COVID, actually, because people really need to be getting out from their homes, and nature is healing, as you know, your information here is talking about, and that's where people can go and relax and kind of de-stress. So we've had a wonderful response to people coming out, even if they hadn't chosen to come out into nature before. They're now finding that nature is a wonderful way for them to cope with some of the stresses of the situations that we're dealing with. So I do see there's some links too that some of the other people put on, and I might be able to add a few for those folks who are interested in seeing some of the programs that we've done in the future, I mean in the past, and then hopefully again we'll be doing in the future. So.
Thank you, Meshel. Yeah, unfortunately, we're nearing the end of our time here, so I think we need to wrap it up for Q&A. Nadine, do you have any finishing thoughts or ending thoughts that you want to add?
Oh, you know, I just feel like the forest Land is a partner in all of this work, and so just appreciating it and appreciating both, you know, you, Katie, and Allie, and Michelle, and all of those of you who work with organizations that both tend the land and give us opportunities to connect with it and be on it in different ways. So just gratitude and appreciation, I think.
Thank you, Nadine.
Well, speaking of gratitude and appreciation, Nadine, we are so grateful to have had you come and share with us. And thank you everyone who joined us today. I hope that you enjoyed yourselves and that you learned something and that you can take this and use it the next time you're out in your garden or out in the woods or walking your dog. And we would love to, at some point in the future, when it is safe and people are comfortable, doing something in person as well. Allie is going to follow up with everyone with the email addresses where you that you used to register for this, and is going to send you a link to the recording of this webinar, and also some further resources that Nadine is going to share. Nadine, do you have something to add?
Just say that one of the resources we'll share is a link to an actual, like a little quick start guide on forest bathing. So
Great.
you can download it. It's like on one sheet of paper. So
Great. That's awesome.
Excellent.
Just for clarity, the survey link will go out at the end of this webinar right afterwards. And then tomorrow you should receive an email from me with the link to the recording and also the resources that Nadine is sharing with me. So, yeah.
Thanks, Allie. Yeah, that the survey, if you can share with us your thoughts about this webinar, about how it went, and about ideas for future webinars as well. That really helps us to improve our future programming. And I also wanted to add again, if it's something that's within your means at this time and you enjoyed this program, please make a donation to support this work and to support continuing our practice of being able to offer these events for free or at low cost. And that link again is in the chat right now. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Nadine, for sharing with us today and volunteering your time. We really appreciate it and appreciate you bringing your expertise today. And everyone, I hope you find time soon to get out and practice some of this and enjoy being outside.
thank you guys. It was delightful to be with you all today. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Allie, and everybody for taking the time to come.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.